You'll have to forgive me, we were trying to do this filming with Vancouver in the background, but there's so many forest fires raging that everything is caught in a smoky haze. This brings us to the insurgency in the Philippines, a minor conflict. Unfortunately, there are several problems in the Philippines, primarily between Muslim insurgents, the indigenous peoples, communist insurgents, and other rebel groups against the national government. It's a little hard to date the conflict. The communist insurgency became violent in 1948. Since 1960, there have been 40,000 deaths, 120,000 deaths in total up till now. The Muslim insurgency started, or at least the fighting started, in the 1960s, first with several Muslim and Islamic groups fighting each other, then with support from Al-Qaeda and others, striking at other targets, mostly civilian. The U.S. government has provided advisors, equipment, and financial support as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. This brings us to the Amazon land conflict, a very, very minor conflict in Peru. Since 2009, a disagreement over land use and the exploitation of the rainforest has some indigenous peoples and the national government at odds. 52 people were killed on June 5th, 30 activists and 22 police. This brings us to Central America and the Colombian armed conflict. A minor conflict since 1964. Between 50,000 people and 200,000 people have died. Lots of people have died in this conflict. One reason is because the current conflict is actually a continuation of the older conflict. In 1948, when the popular leader of the Communist Party was assassinated, it kicked off a conflict known as La Violencia, which ended in 1958, having killed 200,000 people. But since the mid-1960s, a few guerrilla groups have been battling the government forces. Unfortunately, the guerrilla groups keep crashing the peace talks. Then there's the drug lords, who apparently like to engage in terrorism as well against the government for being so harsh on them. The biggest group, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, are currently intensifying their guerrilla campaign. This brings us to our last conflict, the Mexican drug war, a major conflict. The reason this conflict is included with the other major conflicts is because the Mexican drug war produces high enough casualties, over 1,000 per year. This war since 2006 has killed 10,475 people. This conflict is between the Mexican government and the drug cartels, who are allied to one side of the drug cartels or the other, who are also fighting with each other. The Mexican government has spent $7 billion on the drug war, and the U.S. government has donated $5 billion to support the war on drugs. The Mexican army has hammered down the ability for the Mexican drug cartels to move cocaine in the US or Canada, prompting an upsurge in the gang violence right here in Vancouver, where the cocaine prices increased from $23,300 to almost $39,000 per kilo, as both US and Canadian drug markets experience prolonged cocaine shortages. If I were to add up all the fatalities from all of those conflicts, I added the ones from the Iran-Iraq War and the first Gulf War, I would get a figure of somewhere around 4.5 million dead. Well, at least that's not the 60 million dead that you got in the Second World War, but what level of loss is acceptable? There are, however, more forces to add to this list, as history is changing on a daily basis. North Korea recently kicked out all of the UN weapons inspectors. The United Nations and Iran are having a conflict over nuclear energy. NATO and Russia are arguing over Georgia. It's too bad. The United Nations helps out a lot, but oftentimes has their hands tied by the member nations who hold veto power in the UN Security Council, and they know who they are. It's hard to tell, but a large portion of conflict is over Islam. Islamic countries wish to remain so and promote Islam around the world, while this is opposed by the Western powers for obvious human rights abuses. I did some digging and found that the UN was having a war of words with the Islamic powers over the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the defaming of religion. It would seem that this conflict is going to rage forever, at least until the aliens show up. Anyway, I hope this helps in some way, and maybe in the end we can all live like we do here in Canada, mostly peacefully.